Okay, Boker Tov, everyone. Shavua Tov. We'll dedicate the shiur to a refuah shalema to Charlie Yechezkel Yehuda Ben Yenta. I think that's right, isn't it, Avram? And we hope that this will give him some chizuk. Right, now then, it's 4 weeks since we learned, due to a combination of various trips that I did on Sundays. So I don't suppose anybody remembers anything about what we were doing. No, Michael Krause hasn't a clue. Stuart hasn't a clue. Nobody's got a clue. Well, I'll give you a little secret. Neither did I have a clue. But I went and listened to the recording, or at least the end of it, earlier on this morning. And I'm going to share with you, I'm actually going to share with you the end 2 minutes or so of last week's shiur, of last time's shiur, because it is quite interesting and appropriate. David Marks, can you remember the end of the last shiur? Oh, he's disappeared. Frightened him off. Right, okay, well, here we go. Let me share the screen with you. Tell me when you can see the screen. Oh, hang on, I need to share the I need to share the sound as well. So I'm just going to stop that. Hang on a minute. Well, let's just let David back in. Okay. Right. David, are you with us again?
Yeah, I just lost you for a second.
Can you remember how the last week's shiur ended, or the last?
I can't even remember how last night's game ended, let alone the shiur 4 weeks ago. Okay,
well, here comes your opportunity to relive a momentous last 2 minutes of the shiur last time. Ready, everyone? Okay, here we go. Can you see the screen?
Great Wall of China.
Yeah. Just to end up the Rashi that you started with, I found the source of Rashi, which is a Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah, and the Midrash there very cleverly connects the end of the Rashi to the Pasuk. Okay, if you remember, you said that when Shaul saw David in his regal armor, and Shaul had ayin hara, okay, miyad or ayin hara.
There it is on the screen now.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, the Midrash adds, K'shera'a David shehil bin Panei Shaul. When David saw that Saul's face had turned white, literally, Amar lo uchal lalecha ba'ele ki lo nisiti vayisiren David me'alav. Therefore, it was David's reaction to Shaul's anger that led him to take off those royal garments.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So it fits in with what we said before, that David is trying to demonstrate to Shaul, I'm not after your crown. I don't want your royal garments. I just want to save God's honor, if you like, from this arrail. It all fits in beautifully. Shaul sees David as a threat to his crown. David says, I'm not a threat to your crown. I'm Avdecha. I'm your servant. I don't want your royal garments. I'm taking them off. And the whole reason I'm doing this is because he is an Arel, because he is an uncircumcised Philistine. So I'm not after your crown. I think that fits in beautifully. Our whole approach to this subject fits in very nicely with that midrash. Thank you, David. There we go. There was the end of last time shiur. What we were talking about,
Johnny, it wasn't playing.
Oh, you didn't hear it?
No.
Oh, why didn't you say? Okay. I don't know why that didn't play. But never mind. I'll tell you what it said. That's a shame. Okay.
I had the Great Wall of China. on the screen.
Right.
It was like
Did
a
you?
screensaver.
I think you
Oh.
shared the wrong screen.
Oh, okay. Let me try once more because it's definitely worth listening to. Let me just go back and try once more. Okay, hang on a second. Let's see if I can do it again. And this time, maybe I'll share the right screen. Right. Tell me if you can see a bit of
Yeah.
screen now with me in the top right-hand corner.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Tell me if you can hear it when I press play.
Kshera'a David Shehilbin Pnei
Can you hear that?
Shaul.
David
When
Mark.
David saw
Right, so I'm just going to go back a little bit then because I just want to start this off. Okay, listen carefully now to David Marks, please. And we'll carry on next week, please God, at the normal time of 10:15. Any questions? Yes, David.
Yeah. Just to end up the Rashi that you started with, I found the source of Rashi, which is a Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah, and the Midrash there very cleverly connects the end of the Rashi to the Pasuk. Okay, if you remember, you said that when Shaul saw David in his regal armor, and Shaul had ayin hara, okay, miyad or ayin hara.
There it is on the screen now.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, the Midrash adds, Kshera'a David Shehilbin Pnei Shaul. When David saw that Saul's face had turned white, literally, Amalo lo chalalecha ba'ele kilonisiti vayisirem David me'alav. Therefore, it was David's reaction to Shaul's anger that led him to take off those royal garments.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So it fits in with what we said before, that David is trying to demonstrate to Shaul, I'm not after your crown. I don't want your royal garments. I just want to save God's honor, if you like, from this arrail. It all fits in beautifully. Shaul sees David as a threat to his crown. David says, I'm not a threat to your crown. I'm Avdecha. I'm your servant. I don't want your royal garments. I'm taking them off. And the whole reason I'm doing this is because he is an Arael, because he is an uncircumcised Philistine. So I'm not after your crown. I think that fits in beautifully. Our whole approach to this subject fits in very nicely with that midrash. Thank you, David. Right. So that was what we ended with last time. Did you hear it this time? Yeah. Okay. So what we were talking about is let me share the screen back to our chapter 17, and what we were talking about was that this pasuk here, 38 and 39. Jeffrey, if you could read verses 38 and 39 for us. You're muted at the moment, Jeffrey, so there you go.
And Saul dressed David with his garments, and he placed a copper helmet on his head, and he dressed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword over his garments, and he did not want to go in them, for he was not accustomed. And David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I am not accustomed. And David took them off.
Okay, stop there. So that's what we were talking about last time. We were talking about the idea that Saul had given David his armor, and on the face of it, David just said, I can't be doing with this. I'm not used to it. And we brought that Rashi that said that David took it off because he saw ayin hara. He saw a bad eye in Saul. He saw Saul looking at him in a bad way. And David explained to us at the end of the last shiur that it comes from a midrash, which says that Shaul became white. Yalbinu, I think was the word, from the word lavan, white. And he became white. Why do people become white? They can become white with anger. Okay, and he was white with anger because he saw that David was wearing this royal armor, notwithstanding the fact that he himself, Shaul, had actually given him the armor to wear. He wasn't happy with it because he saw it as David trying to usurp his position as king. David takes it off and says, I'm not trying to usurp your crown, and I don't want your armor. And he takes it off. And I wanted to just share with you a few sources within Tanakh where we see that the placing of somebody's clothes on them represents them taking over that position. Can anybody think of a time in the Torah itself where somebody had a transfer of authority by a transfer of clothing?
Yosef and Pharaoh.
Yosef and Pharaoh. Yes, he gives him clothing, that's true, and he gives him a ring there. Pharaoh doesn't take his own clothes off and give them to Joseph, so it's not quite the same, but you're right in as much as there is a certain transfer of power. There's another example in the Torah where there is a complete transfer of power demonstrated by a transfer of clothing. Does anybody know where that is? David?
Yeah, when Aaron dies and Moses takes Aaron's clothing off his Bigdei Kahuna and transfers them to Elazar.
Correct. And where will you find that?
Parshas Chukat.
Very good. Okay, there it is on the screen for you. Bamidbar chapter 20. Let's read this, Jeffrey, off the screen if you can, please. From verse 23.
The Lord said to Moses and Aaron at Mount Hor on the border of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered to his people, for he shall not come to the land which I have given to the children of Israel, because you defied my word at the waters of dispute. Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son and ascend Mount Hor. Strip Aaron of his garments and dress Eleazar his son with them. Then Aaron shall be gathered into his people and die there. Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He ascended Mount Hor in the presence of the entire congregation. Moses then stripped Aaron of his garments and dressed Eleazar his son in them. And Aaron died there on the top of the mountain. Then Moses and Eleazar descended from the mountain.
Okay, so there we go. So there is a perfect example of the transfer of power being demonstrated by the person taking over wearing the garments of the previous holder of the post, in this case the Kohen Gadol. So in our chapter of Shmuel, where David is placed, or David has placed upon him the armor of Shaul, it could certainly be seen, and seems to have been seen by Shaul, as a marker for the future that David will take over from Shaul. And of course, that's exactly what happens. So there are some other examples of that which I'd like to share with you. Anybody know any other ones? We haven't yet learnt it, but you might know the story. It's in Malachim Aleph. Any ideas? David, any ideas?
Eliyahu and Elisha.
Yes, very good indeed. Very good. Malachim chapter 19. We will see here, verse 19 there. This is Eliyahu Hanavi, and his successor was another prophet called Elisha. Elisha is famous for what? What is Elisha most famous for? We read it in a Haftorah not very long ago.
Oh, I can't unmute.
Faye, do you know?
Yeah, I can't unmute. Am I unmuted?
No, you are unmuted. We can hear you.
Ah, okay. So it was where he did those miracles. Elisha, like with the oil, with the woman who was poor and couldn't pay, was going to get evicted.
Yes.
And then also with the child that he laid on him and breathed in, gave him CPR.
Correct.
Basically.
Correct, Faye.
The miracles.
Elisha was most famous for bringing back the child to life. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation in the Torah there. We read about it in the Haftorah a few weeks ago. And this is where we see here Eliyahu, as it were, handing over the mantle, if you like, and it's going to use that word mantle, to Elisha. Verse 19, Jeffrey, please, on the screen.
And he went from there, and he found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, as he was ploughing. 12 yoke were before him, and he was with the 12. And Elijah went over to him and threw his mantle over him.
Threw his mantle over him. What did I just say? And I didn't even mean to say that when I first said it. I said that the mantle passed to Elisha. And that's where that is exactly where that expression in English comes from. We say that if you pass the mantle to somebody else, it means that you are passing on the leadership, you're passing on that role to somebody else. A mantle is, in fact, a piece of clothing. We use that word for the thing that we dress the Sefer Torah in, don't we? We call that a mantle. It's not a word that we use in everyday language, but it means a garment. It means a covering, and in this particular case, it means the garment of leadership. What happened? We will read it in next week's parsha. What happens in next week's parsha is that Joseph is not popular with his brothers, and they decide that they're going to sort him out. Because why? Because he says that he's going to lead, he's going to rule over them. He says, I've had this dream and you're all going to bow down to me. And the brothers say, Hamashol Timshol Banu, are you going to rule over us? And of course, what was Joseph wearing?
A coat of many colors.
A coat of many colors, a striped coat, which denoted what? It denoted his father's appointment of him as the favored son, as the leader. And so later on in the parsha, when it comes to the brothers trying to do away with Joseph's dreams of leadership, what is the first thing that they do to him?
Wear his coat.
They take his coat off, and they take it off him, and eventually they dip it into the blood of an animal.
Yes, correct. So
they take that as evidence to the father.
Okay, so the second part is in order to fool their father. But the first part, which you said, vayafshitu is the expression, if I'm not mistaken, and they stripped him. They stripped him of his coat. Now, what do we say in English when when somebody has the leadership taken up from them, he was stripped of his leadership, right? He was stripped of his role. And so this taking off of the coat of Joseph was the reverse of what we've got here in on the screen, which is Malachim, and what we've got here on the screen now, which was Aaron dressing, or having Elazar dressed in Aaron's clothing to give him the leadership. With the Joseph story, the fact that he has his leadership coat, as it were, taken off him is very highly symbolic of the brothers saying to themselves and to Joseph, you are no longer the chosen one. You are no longer the favored one. You are no longer the leader. We have taken that coat off you. And then when Joseph becomes second in command in Egypt, as Michael pointed out earlier on, there is another garment given to him, royal garments, not actually Pharaoh's garments, but they are nevertheless garments of leadership, plus the ring of authority with which he can seal various laws and what have you. So we see here that this, why am I laboring this point? Because the idea that Shaul should be white with anger or fear, it could be fear, it might not necessarily be anger, because of course when you get a shock and you're fearful of something, what happens to the color in your face? We say it in English, don't we? Right. The color drains from your face and you become white. And that's the midrash that David Marks quoted to us at the end of last shiur, uses the word that the face of Shaul became white. So we can build a picture now of what's going on here in the subtext. The simple reading of our psukim, let's go back to our chapter. The simple reading is David put on these armor things, and he didn't feel comfortable in them, and he took them off. We wondered, I think, a few weeks ago, we read I think it was a midrash as well. I think Rashi brought it, but I think it was based on a midrash that said that these garments, not these garments, this armory of Shaul, of course, Shaul was what? A tall man, head and shoulders taller than everybody else. We've pointed out this a few times. Jeffrey pointed it out. David was just a mere youth and a smallish fellow at that. And we read about this miracle that happened, that the armory shrunk to fit David, a bit like Cinderella's slipper. Okay, Cinderella was fitting to be the princess because her foot fitted into the slipper. Here you see Shaul goes white because he sees that his own armor, his own royal armor, is miraculously shrinking to be a perfect fit for David. Shaul correctly interprets that sign as meaning David is going to be the one who's going to take over from him. Now, if you are Shaul and you see your rival and you see that this is, the signs are there that he's going to take over from you, what are you going to want to do? Michael Kraus, what would you want to do if you were Shaul?
Like David did later on, send him to the front to get killed, so send him to Goliath so he gets killed. Get rid of him. Get rid of him. And what better way to get rid of him than to send him to Goliath, this enormous man who's going to make mincemeat out of him. We see it, as you said, David himself wanted to get rid of Uriah for a different reason. It wasn't because of the leadership. He wanted Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, and so he sent Uriah to the front to be killed. We also see it elsewhere, that you send your rival off to war, and then of course that's him done. So here the fact that Shaul dresses David himself in his armory and then sees this miraculous
event that it shrinks to fit David, Shaul thinks, uh-oh, I'm in trouble here. There's another example that we have of clothing being leadership. Let me just quickly show you this. Chapter 15 of Shmuel. We've learned it before. If you could read the screen for us, Jeffrey, verse 26 to 28.
And Samuel said to Saul, I shall not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being a king over Israel. And Samuel turned to go, and he seized the skirt of his robe, and it tore. And Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to your fellow who is better than you.
Okay, so that we see again, it's another example of clothing being linked with leadership. So I think that we've understood now in great detail, and we've gone into further detail after David's presentation of the Midrash at the end of the last shiur. We can see now that Shaul has a little bit of what shall we say, a little bit of a double-edged sword, if you'll pardon the pun, in this battle with David and Goliath. Because on the one hand, of course, he wants to beat Goliath. On the other hand, he'd rather like David to get removed from the scene as well, because David is now clearly a rival to him for the throne. He's been told by Shmuel that somebody better than him is going to take over. We've seen and we've been critical of Shaul up till now because he is the king. He is the tallest and most imposing of the people. And we have said that it should be him that steps forward to go to Goliath, and he doesn't. David, on the other hand, steps up to the plate. That is the person that Shmuel was referring to when he told Shaul in chapter 15 that Jeffrey's just read, the kingdom is going to be given to somebody better than you. The signs are all there. We who know, excuse me, the end of the story can see it very clearly. But imagine that you're Shaul. This is just dawning on you now that this is not a good situation. So let's go on now to talk about the actual battle between David and Goliath. What's a bit ironic here is that this whole picture demonstrates to us the difference between Shaul and David. Shaul gives him this armory. He wants to try and give him the best possible battle gear. But David already understands, doesn't he, that this battle is not going to be won in conventional terms. This is not going to be a battle of Goliath's strength against David's strength, or Goliath's weaponry against David's armory. It can't be. David knows that he hasn't got a chance in that scenario. David knows that he has no realistic possibility of victory in the normal course of events. And so he understands that the key to victory here, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's help, and this is what we've seen in our most recent history as well, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's help, the key to victory is to exploit the weakness of the enemy, right? Cast your minds back 50 years, a bit more now, isn't it? 55 years to June 1967. What brought about the stunning victory in 6 days? What was the main reason for that? Was that with God's help, the Israeli army exploited the weakness of the Egyptian army to start with by destroying the vulnerable plains on the ground. The plains on the ground were a weakness. They were not properly protected. And on the face of it, this was a David in Goliath. The armies of Egypt and Jordan and Syria were far more numerous, far better armed than was the Israeli army. But like David, the Israeli army discarded, as it were, the first obvious thing, which was the power, because they had much more power than did the Israelis. And they exploited the weakness of the Egyptian army by destroying the entire Egyptian air force in the first few hours of the war, leaving them a complete free reign, as it were, in the skies. Now, what David does is similar. With the help of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he exploits the weakness of Goliath. Now, what was the weakness of Goliath? I think Jeffrey just said the word.
Well, he was overconfident, wasn't he?
Correct.
He saw a youth, and he saw how he came, and he said, "What, you're going to fight me with sticks?" You know.
Correct. He was absolutely overconfident. He was arrogant. And let's look at what happens. Okay, we're at verse 40, Jeffrey.
And he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth pebbles from the brook, and he placed them in the shepherd's bag which he had, and in the sack, and his slingshot was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine.
Okay, stop there. Right, so look at the psukim carefully and tell me what David has in his hands.
He's got the slingshot.
He's got the slingshot in one hand. What's he got in the other hand?
Well, I presume he's carrying the bag.
No, look at verse 40 again, Jeffrey. Read it again.
Oh, his staff, course. Yeah.
So he's got a stick in one hand and he's got the slingshot in another hand. Where are the pebbles? Where are the stones?
They're in his bag.
They're in his bag. Hidden away. Okay, bear that in mind. David has his staff and his slingshot in his hands. Okay, and he approached the Philistine. That's what we've just said. Verse 41.
And the Philistine was continuously drawing nearer to David, and the man who bore the shield was before him.
Stop there. What picture do we have of Goliath now? He's approaching David, but he has in front of him a shield bearer. Why is that? Why has he got a shield bearer in front of him at this point?
Maybe concern somebody use a bow and arrow to him.
Yeah, this guy's cannon fodder. He's the protection. You know, when you go in your when you're the president of the United States and you travel to your visits, you go in a motorcade, right? We've all got this picture of JFK before he was shot in this motorcade, right? It didn't actually help him because it was with a gun that they got him. But he's not the first car. You have a couple of outriders first, and you have a car. And then in the middle, you have the most important person, and then you have somebody else at the back for protection. This shield bearer at this stage was protection for Goliath, because at this stage, he didn't know who was coming, right? At this stage, he didn't know that it was David. He only knows it's David in the next pasuk. So in the first pasuk here in 41, He's got his protection in front of him. He's got his bodyguard, if you like, in front of him, so that if there's any sort of landmines going on, any sort of surprise attacks, this poor fellow cops for it, and not Goliath. So verse 41, Goliath is still a little cautious. He's not demonstrating his arrogance and his overconfidence yet. But as Jeffrey said, it's coming. Verse 42.
And the Philistine looked and saw David, and he despised him, for he was a youth and ruddy with an attractive appearance.
Stop there. Okay. So this is the first time that Goliath actually clocks David and looks at him and sees him. Vayabet haplishti, and Vayabet is mabat is a viewing. You might find when you go on a tiul that there is a mabat and nekudat mabat. It's a viewpoint. It's a place where you will look out and view. Vayabet haplishti. That word is the implication of that word is that it's a view from afar. He sees him for the first time. Vayir'eh et David, and he sees David. He looks and he sees David. Vayivzehu, and he despised him. Where do we have that word in the Torah? A couple of weeks ago in the Parsha.
Oh, it was it was the Philistines despised Shimshon when he was in chains.
Possibly. I wasn't thinking of that. I was thinking about the Sedra. I'll come back to that, Jeffrey, and have a look and see if you're right. In the Sedra a couple of weeks ago, where did we see that word?
Leah was despised.
No, Leah was hated, not despised.
Okay, sorry about that.
Little bit before that, Faye. David, tell us. Yes, Esav despised the birthright. Uses that very, very same word. Vayivez Esav et habechora. When Jacob sold the birthright to Esav for a pot of stew, the Torah tells us that Esav got up, he ate, he got up, and he went away. Vayivez et habechora. He despised it. He rejected it. He despised it. It meant absolutely nothing to him. That's what the word in Hebrew vayivez means. It means nothing to me. And what we're saying here is vayivzeu. I don't think it's a great translation in English. I don't know what the word should be, but it means he completely disregarded. Maybe a better word would be disregarded. I think that's probably a better word in the context. He disregarded David completely. He was a nothing. Why? We're told why. Look at that Hebrew word there, ki, which in this context means because. Why did he despise him and what did I just say? Disregard. Why did he disregard him? Tells us because he was a youth. Ki haya na'ar. He was a youth. He was just a young lad. Va'admoni, and he was ruddy and an attractive appearance. Why he should disregard him because he was ruddy, he was a gingy. Maybe that's the root. Maybe that's the source for people making fun of ginger people. I don't know. Anyway, I'm only joking. But I don't know why he should be despised and disregarded because he was attractive, but perhaps because Goliath was such an ugly brute that he saw this good-looking fellow and despised him for it. You know, if you see somebody who's better looking than you, you don't like it. You know, he's jealous of him. Yes, Jeffrey.
But it actually says in Art Scroll, derided.
Derided, that's a good word.
And I think that my mistake with Shimshon, the comparison Shimshon, actually he was ridiculed. He wasn't despised. I think the word probably was ridiculed.
Let's have a little look. I was learning the story of Shimshon immediately before this shiur, because I have the pleasure on a Sunday morning of learning with my grandchildren in Australia, and with one of them I'm learning the story of Shimshon. So I happen to have it on the screen. There you are. It was still on the screen from before. So let's see what happens. There's Shimshon. That's where. Let's go on to the next chapter of Shimshon and see what happens to whether we use that word vayivas. I don't think we do. Here we go. This is the. This is where they ridicule him. Here we go. Here we go. Verse 25 on the screen, Jeffrey.
And it was when their hearts were merry that they said, call for Samson, and he will make sport for us. And they called for Samson out of the prison house. And he made sport before them, and they stood him between the pillars. Okay.
It's the word is vayitzachek, from litzchok, to laugh at. They were same word as Yitzchak, of course. They laughed at him and as you say, derided. And they didn't despise him, they derided him. They were making fun of him. Yeah. So yes, okay, good. Derided, I think, is a good word. I think disregarded is a good word for this Vayivizehu. And he's an attractive fellow, and Goliath's an ugly fellow, so he doesn't like that either. So by now, you don't see the shield bearer anymore. So what he's done is, he said, oh, go, you can go, I don't need you. Look at this little schnip. I don't need a shield bearer for this little schnip. So you can leave, you can go back to the ranks. And so that's the beginning of what we see is this overconfidence, this arrogance of Goliath, which David is going to exploit. Now then, verse 43, Jeffrey.
And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his God. Okay, so stop there. So the Philistine says to David, Goliath says to David, you know what, you think I'm a dog? You come with a stick? Where's your sword, you whatever you are, you wimp? Okay, where's your sword? You come with a stick? I'm not a dog. I'm a big soldier. Look at me, you know. I'm full of armor and sword and shield. You can't come with a stick. I'm not a dog. And then the Philistine cursed David by his God. Now, on the screen here, you can see God has a small g, which means that the Philistine cursed David by his, i.e. the Philistine God. What do you have in the art scroll there, Jeffrey? It's also with a small g. Okay, let's have a look at Rashi, because it actually gives the plural. It calls them gods rather. Okay. God. So clearly, both the art scroll and the Chabad translation here, Rashi doesn't say anything. Okay, say that there's another opinion that when it says Baal have his God, that it's a bit ambiguous, because if it had a capital G, the Philistine cursed David by his own God, and that would be even more riling
to David. To be cursed by his own God, in other words, to be cursing his God with a capital G, David's God, would be even more taunting and ridiculing of David. So there's an opinion that says like this, that the Philistine cursed David by his own God's name, and there's another opinion that the Philistine used Hashem's name to wind up David and to curse him. Okay, so we'll just take the Rashi off again because he didn't help on this occasion.
Johnny,
yes, David.
Is there any significance in the fact that David came to Goliath in Maklo with his staff in the singular, and Goliath says, "Why are you coming to me with your staff?" by Maklot in the plural?
Interesting. I think there may well be something in that. Let's deal with that now. I asked you earlier on, what did David have in his hand? And you told me that he had a stick in one hand and his slingshot in the other hand. What does the Philistine say to David? Why are you coming at me with sticks? So he has not clocked what's in David's other hand, has he? He's not said, why are you coming at me with a stick and a slingshot? All he said is, why are you coming at me with sticks, plural, meaning that all he sees as David's weapon is sticks. He doesn't see the slingshot. So I think that possibly is relevant, David, in that regard, that Goliath does not see David's weaponry properly. He doesn't look properly. Again, a reflection of his overconfidence, perhaps, that all he sees is this little a shepherd boy with a stick in one hand, doesn't even look what he's got in his other hand, and assumes that all his weaponry is sticks. So that's interesting that David pointed that out. Have you anything else on that, David, before we carry on?
Please carry on. I'm just looking at it now.
Okay, yes, Jeffrey?
Something comes to mind that's an English saying that sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt, which is actually contradicted in the following couple of verses. Because words, what he does, he cursed David by his heathen god, and David returns he actually returned the message to Goliath that the whole tribe of Israel should know how David has come into battle.
Very good, Jeffrey. Very good. I like it. Let's read on the next two psukim, 44 and 45, which supports your theory. Go ahead.
And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I shall give your flesh to the fowl of the air and to the cattle of the field." And David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, and I come to you with the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, which you have taunted."
So Goliath says to David, "Come here, you little wimp. I'm going to make mincemeat out of you, and I'm going to give your flesh to the fowl of the air and the cattle of the field." In other words, you're not even going to get a burial. You're going to be completely finished. And David said, "Well, that's what you think. You come to me," and we're going to go into this in a little bit of detail, perhaps not now, perhaps next week. "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin. And I come to you with what?" Doesn't say I come to you with a slingshot or a stick. What does he come to him? What's his weapon? What does he tell Goliath is his weapon? Yes, Michael, you're right. the name of the Lord of hosts. I'm coming with you with Hashem, the God of the armies of Israel. And you're in trouble, mate, because that God is somebody that you have taunted. So David says, you can have what? Where do we see? Where do we read in our prayers a similar idea to verse 45? Say again, Faye.
In Shemona Esrei.
Where?
In the first, in the first verses. I don't have.
Okay, I see what you mean. You're saying that God is Magen Avraham. God is the protector of Abraham. Yes, that's true. I wasn't thinking of that. I was thinking of something even more explicit, which supports the verse of 45. Yes, Jeffrey.
Biyad chazaka v'zra natuya, with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm.
Okay, so again, that's God's deliverance of the people. That's right. But there's an even more obvious one than that. By this time in davening, you've lost a bit of concentration. You might even have started to think about taking your tefillin off, although you shouldn't have done by now, but you might be thinking about taking it off. No, before Aleinu. After Ashrei, after the second Ashrei, and before Uvalet Sion, we say what? And we don't say it on certain days.
Lam Natseach.
Lam Natseach. There is a pasuk in. Is there not a pasuk in Lam Natseach? Have I got a siddur here? Let me have a look.
I'm looking.
No, I don't. Does it not say Eila v'rechev v'eila v'asusim v'anachnu
b'shem
Hashem? Yeah. Eila v'rechev. These trust in rechev, chariots. V'eila v'asusim. And these ones, i.e. the goyim, our enemies, trust in horses. In other words, in armory. V'anachnu, but we,
Hashem Elokeinu Nazkir.
B'shem Hashem Elokim Nazkir. We mention Nazkir. We mention the name of God. Okay, the mere mention of the name of God is enough to beat your susim and your rechavim, your chariots and your horses. Am I right that it's in that Lam Natseach?
You're right.
Yeah.
Eila v'rechev. I'm not looking in front of me. Eila v'rechev, eila v'susim.
V'anachnu b'shem Hashem.
V'anachnu b'shem Hashem Nazkir. That is exactly the same thing as verse 45. Now, who wrote that Lam Natseach, do you think?
David.
Correct. King David. King David. David HaMelech wrote that Lam Natseach. And it makes sense because he's very consistent. David said to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, the equivalent of sus v'rechev. And I come to you with the name of the Lord of the hosts, of the God of the armies of Israel, which you have taunted. B'shem Hashem Elokim Nazkir. That pasuk in davening that we say every day is consistent. David is being consistent with his approach to Goliath. He says, you can come with whatever armory you want. I have the ultimate weapon, and that is the name of God. And then he's not finished yet. Verse 46, Jeffrey.
This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I shall slay you, and take off your head, and I shall give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines this day to the fowl of the air, and to the beasts of the earth, and all the earth shall know that Israel has a God.
So here's the difference between what Goliath says and what David says. Goliath says, come here and I'll smash you to pieces and give your flesh to the fowl of the air and the cattle of the field. David says the same thing. I shall give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines this day to the fowl of the air and to the beasts of the earth. But he adds something on, doesn't he? What does he say? He doesn't ascribe it to his own strength or guile or cleverness. He ascribes the victory that's going to come to the God of Israel. This is a difference between a Goliath who is super confident in his own physical ability and David, who knows that he is the servant of God and that he is doing God's work. The difference here between Goliath and David could not be more stark, and it is exactly those last few words which tells us the difference between the two people that we're dealing with. And he's not yet finished. He's got one more pasuk which we will end with, 47, Jeffrey.
And all this assembly shall know that not with sword and javelins does the Lord save, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will deliver you into our hand.
Again, consistent with verse 45, consistent with Lamnat Seach that we say in davening. Sword and javelin, it's not what you need. What you need to have is faith in God, because God is going to win this battle for his people. So that's a great little speech there. Verses 45 to 47 is David's first speech, if you like, as he's the, what's the word? He is the, not the leader, he's the coming up leader. There's a word for it.
The anointed.
Well, he is the anointed, that's right. He is the, what do you call the president, Faye, when he's not yet been inaugurated?
President-elect.
Elect, that's it. Thank you very much. Couldn't think of the word. He is the king-elect here, David, and this is his first speech, if you like, to demonstrate his credentials. And what he does is he's not frightened of this Philistine, and he demonstrates that the reason he's not frightened is that because he believes in God, God will save him. And of course, we know the end of the story. That's exactly what happens. We'll stop there, and we will carry on next week, please God. Any questions or comments about what we have learned today? Let me just summarize more for my own benefit when I look at the recording next week. We learned today, we finished off what David started last week, which was the idea that clothing maketh the man, and that transfer of clothing is transfer of leadership. We showed it with Aaron HaKohen, we showed it with Eliyahu and Elisha. We spoke about it with Joseph. We spoke about it with Joseph and the brothers, with Joseph and Pharaoh. We certainly emphasized that. And then we spoke about the contrast between the overconfidence of the Philistine and his arrogance, and David's guile in hiding his weaponry, and with God's help exploiting the weakness of the Philistine, which was his arrogance and his overconfidence. And we finished off with a contrast between David and Goliath. Goliath says, I'm going to cut you up into little pieces and give your flesh to the fowl of the air and to cattle of the field. David says the same thing, but he adds on, and the earth shall know that Israel has a God. He ascribes all of his coming victory to Hashem, and this is the first speech of David as the king-elect, and is consistent with the Tehillim in davening that we say between Ashrei and Uvalet Zion, Lamnat Seach. Okay, any questions before we go? David, have you found what you were looking for?
No.
Oh, okay, well, we'll start next week with what David's looking for now. Yes, Jeffrey?
Did you, on your recent trip, go to Mount Hor?
We saw Mount Hor, absolutely we did. While we were traveling up the mountains, up the Edomite mountains, you can see Hor HaHar, Har HaHor, sorry, not Hor HaHar, Har HaHor. You can see it. Hor HaHar. Hor HaHar. Too much of a tongue twister. You can see it as you go up the mountains on the left-hand side. It's very clear. It's a mountain on top of a hill on top of a mountain. And that is where, and you can see actually a little white thingy, which is some kind of shrine, I think, that's up there to it. We didn't actually go to Har Har, but we did see it from the coach. Yes, Jeffrey.
It's interesting that it doesn't actually say that he was buried. It just said that he passed on his mantle and he died, but he didn't say he was buried. Now, in other places, people, there's a definite description of their funeral, of their resting place, but it's just that he died there.
Correct. I'm looking at the Sukkim. I might as well share the screen with you now and show you that you are correct. We are verse 26, Jeffrey.
Now, I seem to remember from a child that other people, when their death is described, it doesn't actually necessarily mention. It just says that they went up to heaven. There
are a certain number of people who Midrash tells us didn't die and were taken up to heaven alive. Eliyahu Navi was one. Pinchas was one.
Yeah.
Who are the other ones, David? Amram, I think, was one of them, the father of Moshe. Who else? I think there's about another couple that I can't just think of right now. But here we are told, Jeffrey, you're right. If you want to read to us verse 26.
Strip Aaron of his garments and dress Eleazar his son with them. Then Aaron shall be gathered into his people and die there.
So he dies there, and that's what happens. Aaron died there, verse 28. Aaron died there on top of the mountain. And you're right, we don't read about a burial. That's interesting. He just died there. Very interesting. I never noticed that before. Excellent. Very good. Any other comments or questions?
I take it you've just come back from Petra then?
Yes.
Okay.
We had a trip to Petra. We did a trip to Petra, and on the way up we saw Har Har.
Yeah, it's quite a distance from Petra. I didn't. I had a car then. This is years and years ago, and it was too far to go.
Yeah, you can see as you go up and ascend the mountains, you can see it over to the west. You actually ascend to the east of it.
So it's very interesting because I would have thought that from that point where that tomb is, one could see the Arava and beyond.
I'm sure you can. Because that was a vantage point.
Yeah.
And of course, I
mean, Moshe and Aaron were denied entry into the promised land.
Correct. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Very good. Excellent. Right. Tomorrow night, you can stop recording now if you like, Avril.